So we'll go ahead and we'll call this a special Board of Education workshop meeting to order, please. Suzette, if we could please do the roll.
Yes. Ms. Klug.
Here.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Ustruck.
Here.
Mrs. Justum.
Here.
Mr. Sickich.
Present.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
President Emmons.
Here. So tonight we have a presentation on the West Southwest Milwaukee Community Change and Projection Report. So Caitlin, if you want to do the introduction, we can get started from there.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have some special guests, and I will actually throw it over to Steve to introduce Mark and Nick and move on with our presentation for the night.
Hey, well, welcome everybody and good evening. As you know, we've been working on the facilities master plan for quite a few months, and there's several parts and a lot of detail that goes into the development of that. As you know, we looked at the age and the size and all the details of the buildings. We've had assessments done of the mechanicals, the electrical, plumbing, HVAC, security systems. Out of this, we'll have a capital improvement project plan that'll also have a cost associated with it. We've looked at the capacity of each of the rooms within the buildings and then the buildings as a whole. And then all of these steps are part of that bigger facilities master plan. And one of the last big parts of that is this community change and student enrollment projections report. And so with us tonight are Mark Roffers and Nick Johnson, our experts from MD Roffers Consulting. And I'll turn it over to them, and they should be able to share their screen and then walk us through the presentation.
I will get us kicked off. Nick is the brains behind the operation, so if questions get a little too tough for me, I'm going to turn them over to Nick. But I'll just get started, and if I could get a nod from someone over there that you can see this presentation, I'll go ahead and get going. Great.
We can see it.
Thank you so much. I've been in one too many presentations where on Zoom where I've been presenting something that actually no one's seeing. So it's good to know that we have that security. So I'm going to present the results of our work over the past few months working for the district, and I'll introduce us along the way here. We're going to talk about what we were asked to do, and Steve did a great job of explaining that already. We are one part of your bigger system to try to work out with you a long-range facility plan. We're going to be talking a little bit about recent trends in enrollment and community development. Talk a little bit about how we project enrollment, because it's anything but looking at the past 10 years and drawing a line forward to the next 10 years. Share with the results, of course, and at least some of our initial thoughts and conclusions and how this might relate to your larger facility planning process. And emphasizing that despite the length of this PowerPoint presentation, it's really just a summary of our broader and deeper community growth and projections report, which we have provided to the district. So a little bit about more about the purpose of our work. First off, who are we, and what is our background here? We're by training urban planners. I've been doing that for almost 30 years now. And we have kind of evolved our practice into also working with school districts, helping them understand the future and how the community that they serve might change. We've worked with many different school districts, including several in your area, on long-range facility planning, enrollment projections, attendance area changes when new schools are added or some schools are taken offline, and projects of that order. The purpose of our work is to uncover how demographic and housing change in your district might affect future enrollment. So we do that by first trying to understand how much housing is on the ground today and how much we might expect. We do have housing, mainly in the form of redevelopment within your district, that has occurred and we expect will occur, and that sometimes does and sometimes doesn't result in new students. We did translate projected housing changes and growth and demographic changes into enrollment projections for your district within all your three grade groups. We've shared those projections by small area, we call them neighborhoods, and your existing elementary, intermediate, and high school attendance areas over the next 15 years. And we've tried to contribute to this notion of comparing those enrollment projections to how many students each school can hold comfortably to compare enrollment to capacity. Starting a little bit on recent trends, this was important for us to gain a better understanding of your district, some of the dynamics around private school enrollment, open enrollment, development that's occurring in your district and how it's relating to new students, and demographic change and who's moving in and out of the district and what's their likelihood of having more or fewer kids as we go forward. So a lot of this is review for you. You know that you've had significant decreases in enrollment over the past five or 6 years to the tune of 250 to 300 students per year of decreased enrollment. These two lines show on the top the total 4K through enrollment change from 2010 to last September. And on the bottom, the resident enrollment change over that same period of time, and they would track each other fairly well. The inevitable question, we finished the report and then we got to September 2020 counts. It showed a continued decline fairly following this line of that has occurred over the last 5 years. That's significant to me because I know that even high growth public school districts throughout the state have seen declines in September 2020 enrollment based on COVID and impacts associated with people choosing not to enroll their students, either redshirting their 5-year-olds or going to different school options, including private. We broke it down here on this table that shows the decreases. The decreases have been most significant at the lower and the upper grades over this period of time. So you've been graduating a lot of high school students over the last several years. That has contributed to the decline without replacing them with kindergartners coming in to the same degree. Interestingly, the 4K enrollment has remained relatively steady, up and down each year, but hovering around the 500 mark over the last 10 years. Changes in open enrollment have tracked with the decreases you've seen in the district. So there's 3 lines on this chart here. The green line is the number of non-resident students that have chosen to open enroll into your schools in the district, peaked in the 2014-15 timeframe, and then have decreased since that time, with some maybe evidence of flattening that curve. The red line indicates the residents and students, folks who live in your district but are choosing to open enroll out to other public schools in different districts, which has shown a steady increase over time. The story of the net of it is that a 430 student deficit in open enrollment and what that's resulted from your district to other school districts. At the same time, we've seen private school enrollment increasing. It's tracked at roughly the same time, relatively flat before 2014-15, and then increasing after that. We've had conversations with district staff that coincided with a lot of different things, the opening of private school, additional private school choices in the area, and the kind of realignment of attendance areas in the elementary school level. I understood it used to be different than kind of a neighborhood-based school attendance area. So those are some of the factors. Again, we see some evidence of flattening of that curve over the last couple of years. Some of those private schools are frankly facing capacity issues, and that may be an influence as well. I mentioned this already. We like to track where graduating seniors are and where entering kindergartners are. The blue line are those graduating seniors, and the red line is the entering kindergartners. So where we have that kind of deficit, that's where we see districts that are declining in enrollment. Not terribly surprising, the municipalities that you encompass and the areas that you encompass are more or less built out. There are a few scattered greenfield sites, certainly some sites for redevelopment, but not a lot of opportunity to grow the population within your community. So this is the combined population of West Dallas and West Milwaukee in this graph. This chart requires a little bit of explaining. It's got a lot of information on it. The dashed lines, this is a age chart, age cohort chart of population. The dashed lines represented the ages or the sizes of the ages, both male and female in 2010. And the shaded areas represent, I guess, females on the right, female and male in 2018. So the two things I'd like you to zero in on is that you have had fairly significant growth in what I call the millennial population over that period, 25 to 40-year-olds. So you see these gray areas over the dashed in both places, suggesting increase in that age cohort. It hasn't necessarily resulted in more population and child population, although that's been relatively stable within your district. So it tells me that birth rates are going down. We know that's the case in your district and every district in your area. So that's something that we kind of keep in mind here. So we have certainly seen, some promise, some evidence of younger people moving into the community, but not yet translated into significant changes in student size. That's again because they're having fewer kids. So you're having more households come in with one kid, no kids than used to in the past. This is the number of births within, I think it's West Dallas and West Milwaukee together. Nick's nodding, that's good. He's my watchdog there. And that slowly declined over the last 10 years as well. So this is the number of births, and it's actually declined a little bit more than the birth rate has declined in Milwaukee County as a whole. Turning to housing, we've seen relatively limited new housing construction, and all of it multifamily forms. In other words, not single family detached houses. The city of West Dallas has typically permitted about 5 new houses per year since 2010. We've had exceptions with a couple of bigger apartment developments and condo developments over the period of time. We've got a couple more on the horizon within your district. West Milwaukee didn't permit any new housing in the last 10 years. There might have been a tear down and a replacement of an existing house, but nothing new. And that could change though as we look forward, so we'll stay tuned to that. Who's moving into this new multifamily housing? It's typically marketed to professionals, millennials, and empty nesters and seniors. Often they include smaller unit sizes and amenities like workout rooms and things like that. Rents are relatively high. And it's borne out that it hasn't attracted. And so I've got my explanation point here of 600 new units since over the last 10 years. You have exactly 2, this was last year, 2 students living in those 600 units. So that's part of the picture, but we've got obviously a huge amount of existing housing in your district. And there's some assets that contribute to appeal to younger families. They're relatively speaking affordable, especially if you look west into Brookfield and even east into east side of Milwaukee. You've got urban amenities that are growing. Accessibility via the interstate network is great, and jobs in the regional medical center and elsewhere are good and growing. You've got a community that's kind of divided a little bit by the interstate, not so, but other factors west of the 894, typically newer, larger, maybe more attractive to younger households, including with kids, than homes east of I-894. We've done work in your district and St. Francis district and others, and we found through that work that older, smaller, single-story bungalows are comparatively more attractive to singles, childless couples, empty nesters wishing to downsize, not terribly attractive to many people who are millennials having kids or interested in having kids. They typically have 1-car garages, 1 or 1.5 baths, limited ability to expand on site, unique fixer-uppers that many millennials, I hate to brand a whole generation, but are not necessarily interested in or have the debt load that can't allow them to support, big improvements to a site. So those are things that are all influencing that. At the same time, we're seeing that the community is getting more racially and ethnically diverse. And some of that diversity is focused in some of those older homes in the older neighborhoods that are more affordable. And the reality of the situation is that different ethnicities and races as a whole have different birth rates, with white population being on the lower end of that scale. Nick is in addition to the researcher, the map maker for our team, and he's produced a few different maps in the report. I'm highlighting a couple of them. This map shows in the green the areas of newer houses versus the older houses in the red colors. Not a surprise to you who've lived in West Dallas and West Milwaukee for a while, but this is certainly an influence as we think about the future and where students might come from. It aligns at least a little bit with where we have women of childbearing ages. So the potential for, at least for additional new students in your district, with at least half of those being on the west side of the district, west of 894. So these are a number of factors that we look at and have looked at as part of your part of the projections to try to figure out where these neighborhoods might head as we go forward. And I realize getting this far into the presentation, I failed to kind of introduce adequately these whole neighborhood concepts. So if you haven't read the report, it's important to understand that we divided your district into, in this case, 49 different neighborhoods. We used named subdivisions as boundaries, major streets like National Avenue or certainly the interstate as boundaries. We didn't cross current attendance areas with neighborhoods. So in other words, neighborhood 17 is in one elementary attendance area, not two or more. And these neighborhoods became the basis of all of our data collection, analysis of existing student population, existing housing, and projections for each of them. So we have an enrollment projection, each of your grade groups for each of these 49 different neighborhoods. Okay, back to the main story. Housing and neighborhood turnover has not always translated to student increases. In many cases, we see a pretty direct correlation. The darker colored areas on the map indicate where existing homes sales have been the highest, sort of the central part of West Dallas. Not terribly surprising. There's a lot of homes in that area, right? Around McCarty Park and to the north. And so new households are definitely moving in, but in many of those neighborhoods, enrollment has actually decreased over that same period. So it sort of supports that theory that we're having some home sales and transitions. The folks that are moving in are not always folks with kids. All right, I'm gonna pause, take a breath for air, and then translate into talking about the methodology that we use for projections. But Steve, I guess I'll ask you if we want to entertain any questions or comments now, or wait until the end.
I think we can do it as we go along, as we go through each section. That might be easier.
Yep. Happy to do that.
Doesn't appear anybody has any at this point, so I think it's okay to go ahead with the projection methodology.
I kind of sprung that on them, so you're welcome to go back to that if you need to. Our analysis again focused on neighborhoods. We divided the district into the 49 neighborhoods. Here are the factors that we used to define the neighborhoods. Sometimes those factors led to convenience for us. If we had an area that had, for example, significant apartment development that all pretty much developed at the same time, it's easier for us to collect data and project enrollment for a more homogeneous type of housing than a more diverse range where we have some areas that might be generating a lot of students and some that might be generating fewer. The attendance areas, current attendance areas and neighborhoods are here on the map. Each of the different colors represent one of your, 11 different elementary schools attendance areas. And a little bit more difficult to follow is the dashed lines. They represent in red the boundaries of the 3 intermediate school attendance areas. And then the blue line represents the boundary of the 2 high school attendance areas. So with all this information, we're able to make projections for each of those 15 different schools, 16. Housing projection methodology. So how do we project housing units? A key component of our work is to try to figure out how many housing units we're going to have on the ground. We projected housing unit growth for 2022, 25, 2030, and 2035. So those are our projection years. We're long range forecasters. We did that by looking at municipal land use plans for the area, the city of West Dallas and Village of West Milwaukee in particular. We had extended conversations and multiple contacts with the municipal planners and with a few residential developers in your area to understand the context and likelihood of different areas developing or redeveloping over the next 15 years. And also to understand the projected rate of new housing growth. If you ever looked at a comprehensive plan of a municipality, it looks like everything might happen tomorrow or never. But the reality is it's something in between and phased over time. So we had gained a better understanding of that. And then we tried to, there's other people that do projections of housing units. We tried to compare what we did to those, the state, the regional planning commission, even the cities and villages. Our projections for housing unit growth sort of ended up in the middle of those different other sources. A lot of information on this slide, but it describes how we project enrollment. The first step is the calculating of the housing units. So for each of the neighborhoods, each of the 49 neighborhoods, we have, as I mentioned, a housing unit projection for each of our projection years. The bigger challenge is calculating the current and projected student per housing unit ratios for each grade group in each neighborhood. And that's focused on this analysis of trends and demographic changes and housing characteristics within each neighborhood. So this, to read this properly, this is our snippet of our massive spreadsheet that we use to do the projections. This suggests that in neighborhood 3, in the year 2025, we are projecting that each housing unit will generate, on average, 0.119 elementary school kids for your district, and that's how all this works. So you can just imagine how big this spreadsheet is, and hopefully the work that went into that. Then we just multiply. The last step is fairly simple. We multiply the housing units in that neighborhood by the projected student per housing unit ratio to come up with a enrollment projection for each neighborhood in each time period and in each grade group. Open enrollment out and private school enrollment is critical. In many districts, it's relatively static, and our job, I guess, is a little bit simpler. Not so for your district. We've talked about the trends recently, and what we have done as we look forward is assume continued annual increase in the number of resident students that choose to open enroll out or attend private or home school. But we do expect that to moderate over the projection period, in part based on capacity limitations of those other districts and other schools, which in many cases, as I mentioned, are starting to matter. And in part, based on potential other factors, the fact that you're engaged in a long-range facility planning effort and kind of taking this issue, seriously, along with the education of the students, I think matters. You have some control over that destiny, and so that's been our assumption. And it could prove that we're even too conservative with that assumption. In other words, I could see a scenario where you begin to capture more and more students than you have in the past. I'll pause again, because now I'll be moving into sort of the numbers and what we came up with our projections.
Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, I just have one question based on the assumption about the private school. Did you, maybe it won't have a huge impact, but for example, Cristo Rey is building a brand new school that's going to significantly increase their square footage. Would something like that have any consequence or impact?
It may, if it also increases the functional capacity of the school. The Crystal Ray did fill up fairly quickly. They are, full in their current location. We tried not to speculate too much on what other schools may or may not do, so we didn't factor in a great capacity increase at Crystal Ray in our forecast or our projections. Nick, I don't know if you have any further comments or reactions.
No, everything you said's accurate.
Yeah, I was just curious because if you look at where Crystal Ray is now and what they're building, it's significant. It's apples and oranges. It's a significant increase in square footage.
Yeah, it certainly could matter. And again, we are not projecting that the West Dallas, West Milwaukee district will reverse the trend of losing students to private schools. We just don't think it will be at as great a rate as it has been in the past.
Okay.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, on the reverse of that, is they're currently in West Dallas, or they're in West Milwaukee, right? Now their new location is going to be in Milwaukee. Could that reverse the trend? Those kids that were walking to school would now have to be bused or find their own transportation. Could that increase our numbers? I mean, we have 2 high schools that are fairly large. I'm sure it probably wouldn't affect us much outside of maybe our staffing and enrollments. So
Yeah, I
would
think
that be the reverse of that? I mean,
it's certainly possible. Nick, is it? Did you learn that Crystal Ray is offering busing for its students, or was that some other schools that I was picking up?
I think that was one of the Montessori schools.
Okay. So yeah, as it becomes more difficult to get to the school, you would expect the appeal to be less.
okay.
And Heather, where is their new location in Milwaukee? Do you know?
Gary might know better than I, but I think it's down towards the lakefront, right?
16th and National.
Yeah, 16th and
Yeah.
National.
Okay.
It's an old MPS school, right?
No, it's brand new from the ground up.
Brand new?
I
Okay.
thought a grocery store used to be on the site at one point.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
took over a large parcel of land, and it's brand new from the ground up.
Yeah.
Good evening. I hate to interrupt. This is Matt Wolford from Bray Architects. We were involved with the Crystal Ray project, so I can give you a little insight. The location you just described is right on. So it's on National at the site of the former grocery store. Their capacity is generally capped more based on availability of work-study job opportunities, not specific to their facility size. So even though they have increased in school physical size, that was more driven by the fact that they finally added a senior class. They started with 1, right, freshman, then sophomore, junior.
Mhm.
So it was more driven by the increase of and adding of the senior class. They have said pretty openly that they're more capped by availability of work-study job opportunities than anything else. So I think it's fair based on all of the dialogues we've had with them for the last multiple years that they're not intending to increase unless the private sector world would better support them or continue to support them at a higher level moving forward.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, I will push forward then, hearing no questions, at least at this time. So housing projections, what do we anticipate looking forward? Well, most new housing will continue to be multiple family in your district. You have very little space, very little undeveloped land. It costs a lot to redevelop land, so that pushes density even higher. In fact, we're projecting that of every 20 housing units that are built in your district for the next 15 years, 19 of them are going to be multifamily units, which, as we know, typically generate fewer students than do single family homes. We're projecting a fairly significant number of new housing developments, about 120 new housing units per year. That's an increase compared to the trend over the past 10 years. It's indicative of both municipalities' interest in continuing to see that growth. It's indicative of employment growth in your area, both from existing housing and from new housing development. And it includes not only housing from West Dallas, but new housing that we are expecting in West Milwaukee. And you've seen some announcements recently of new development prospects there. But the area in and around the former Komatsu site, the area in and around Rex Nord's site could very well be the locations for different types of housing, including potentially family oriented housing options. So our housing projections by neighborhood, this is a kind of a heat map. So the warmer the color, the more housing units we're expecting to be built. You can see it's focused a lot around the town center, West Allis, National Avenue corridor, and in West Milwaukee at the east edge of your district, the Komatsu area, and Rex Nord and surrounding area. Most of these, again, new multiple family associated with redevelopment sites that have been identified by the two municipalities, and some of which have interest from residential developers already. I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between housing and enrollment projections, and emphasize again that what happens in houses that are already in your community are far more impactful, or will be, on your future enrollment than future housing. Most of the housing units are already built. That'll be here in 2035. And as we look forward to the future, the larger housing units, those that were built in the 1970s and 80s, we think will have the greatest influence on your future enrollment. At the same time, we have to kind of a sobering assessment I deliver to all school districts is that existing and projecting housing will likely not generate as many students as new housing did in the past. Most is multifamily, empty nester, and senior housing. Millennial populations are delaying household formation, having fewer children. That's not been helped by the pandemic, by unrest in our communities, by fears of global issues like climate change that are impacting how many and if younger people have kids. So most school districts need quite a bit of new housing growth and the right type just to remain and maintain steady student enrollment. Moving forward, enrollment projections, unless you have any particular questions about what we kind of envision on the housing market. All right, I'll charge forward. So what we're envisioning for your district is over the next 15 years, a decrease of about 283 plus or minus resident students in your schools. One thing I can guarantee about our projections is that they will be wrong. But I think the direction, we feel confident about the general numbers. Don't get too hung up on 280, whether it's 283, 263, or 320. It is basically, it's an estimate with all of the research that has gone into it. Our assumptions, again, continued open enrollment out, private schooling happening, and that rate increasing but slowing over time. Important to also mention, and I underlined it, these are resident student enrollment projections for your district. So it doesn't include open enrollment of non-resident students into your schools. So to the extent that happened, that could be over and above this number. And it also assumes that whatever pandemic effect you've had as a temporary shock to enrollment, we've gotten great news over the last year. I've got 3 students in virtual school. One of them you might have seen at the corner of my screen about 5 minutes ago. I think everyone's excited about the news and to get back to some semblance of normal next year. The enrollment projections that we have are highly variable by neighborhood, depending on whether we expect turnover of existing housing units, new housing unit growth within that neighborhood, and it's based on these municipal plans and where market forces suggest there might be new housing growth. So the areas in the redder colors are areas of plus enrollment growth, and you can see it's not great numbers, plus 13, plus 15, plus 12. The areas in the purple, the cooler colors, represent areas where we expect fewer kids 15 years from now than today. We broke that down by each of the grade groups. Our enrollment projections for 4K through 5, we assume 180 fewer elementary school students over the next 15 years. And assuming no changes in schools or attendance areas, which I know is a big assumption, all elementary schools are projected to remain under capacity through 2035, and some significantly so, ranging anywhere from 35% capacity to 86% capacity, depending on the school. Again, this is based on no changes. You're not doing long-range planning, and you're not going to do anything as a result of it. This is a big old table. I'd encourage you to spend time studying it. It is our full enrollment projections by elementary school attendance area for each of our projection years, projecting whether they'll go up, down, and by how much, and comparing that to the capacity of those buildings to accommodate students. We have projections for the intermediate schools as well. We're projecting, coincidentally, a decrease of 180 intermediate school students between 2019 and 2035. We're going to likely to see a decrease happen in the next few years. You've got, like a lot of districts, fairly large intermediate or middle school class sizes. Those will become high school kids in the next few years. So you can expect a decrease relatively soon. Projected for all three elementary schools, with the greatest at Frank Lloyd Wright, and all three intermediate schools are projected to remain well under their capacity, anywhere between 26% capacity to 62% capacity over the period. Again, not factoring in open enrollment in. So I keep kind of reiterating that, but something to always keep in mind. These are the numbers, so to speak, for the intermediate schools. High school, we're expecting projecting an increase in resident high school enrollment. A lot of that, if not all of that, we project to occur over the next few years as those intermediate school students graduate to the high school years. And we'd expect most of that increase to occur at Central High. Both schools projected to remain well under building capacity, about 50% capacity through 2035. You probably wondered, the math seemed funny. We've obviously got the alternative high school that also factors into the mix as we go forward. Quickly, our conclusions as we kind of looked at these numbers and thought about this over the last few months. Again, in review, we're projecting a decrease in enrollment, although not nearly as significant as a decrease as you've seen over the last 5-year period. We're projecting decreases greatest at the elementary and intermediate school grades, and that nearly all the schools are projected to operate substantially under building capacity, again, assuming no changes in schools or the attendance areas from what you have currently. Some of the implications, at least from our limited perspective, is that it's reasonable for the district to at least consider consolidation of schools, particularly at the elementary school level. Some of the information that we have, and especially the projected enrollment for each of the 49 neighborhoods, could help decide where consolidation might be appropriate and how attendance areas for the schools might be adjusted. But there are a range of other factors. Steve mentioned them earlier, including the condition of the schools, the age, the design, their programmatic appropriateness for teaching kids in the years 2020, 2030, how much site area they have for outdoor recreation, their location. Those are all factors beyond just whether they're projected to have 35% of their capacity filled or 65% over our projection period. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Both Nick and I are available here tonight or after this evening to answer questions that the board or the administration has going forward. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And are there any questions about these last couple of sections or overall?
I have one real quick. When you're talking about the 283, that's net of today's enrollment, or is that a trending 283 per year until 2035?
No, that's a total decrease through 2035. So it represents a significant softening of the decreases that you've seen. We talked a little bit, including this afternoon with Steve. Nick had a conversation, and that's noteworthy. We are projecting a more significant decrease in the next 3 to 5 year period, maybe in the range of 400 to 500 students total. A flattening as we see some, and then some new housing growth and some transition in your community. And then a potential slight increase at the end of the period. And that's banking on some continued transition, but also on West Milwaukee redevelopment coming true. They have capacity within the areas I've mentioned for a significant amount of new housing development, including some housing units, single family detached and townhouses, 3-bedroom apartment type stuff that could be appealing to families with kids.
Brian?
Yeah, just a question, and it's probably not as important for this conversation, but will be further down the line. For the intermediate schools, are those estimated building capacities correct? I thought FLW was actually a bit higher.
I'd have to go back and double check to see what it is for sure.
Because I didn't think it was the smallest of the 3, unless I'm completely confused.
Nick
is more than 700 kids at Simply Great before, so yeah, I would guess that number might be off.
Nick, is it possible we transpose 2 numbers there?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to find the data here.
Yeah, I thought FLW was bigger than West Milwaukee for sure.
You're right. Lane and Frank Lloyd Wright should be flipped.
Okay, those 2.
Frank Lloyd Wright should have 1,400. Lane should have 700.
Good eye. Thank you very much. Yeah, West Milwaukee, I believe, was the old high school, so it has that larger capacity because of that. But we'll get that corrected so you have a correct version to share further.
No, thanks. I just wanted to confirm. I appreciate it.
Everybody have more questions? I think this is incredibly fascinating. Like, we've had these kinds of conversations before, but it's all been anecdotal, in terms of, I think we all kind of knew some of these things, but to see this in writing and to see that these anecdotes and that our theories on things are accurate or not is incredibly appropriate. So I'm glad that we're to this point of the research where we're actually looking at neighborhoods and numbers and projected housing and bedrooms and things like that. Which I think is fascinating, will certainly help us make some better decisions, harder ones, but better, because we'll have more information in the future. So,
great. Yeah, I'm always a little shy about making projections because they seem so determinative, but they do depend on so many different things that other people might do or not do, including school districts and improving the educational environment for kids, both yours and others. And so I've worked for districts that are growing quickly and don't have to do much to get new students, and districts that are not and are declining. And I will kind of communicate it does matter what you do as a board in terms of providing the environment for students and making your district more appealing for students of the future.
I have a question. If we do determine that we are going to consolidate, is the attractiveness of developing the property and the sale of the property going to be factored into potentially schools that we would consolidate?
The conversations that we've had is we'll look at everything. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't had any, I guess, initial conversations about consolidation, because we need to have all of the information. And then once we have all that information, then we can start making, I guess, better informed decisions of what we want to do, if we want to do something, and how quickly we do want to do it.
In my experience, that could be part of your criteria that you develop if you do reach that stage, certainly.
Sure, a property that's on a main road might be more attractive for redevelopment than something that's in the middle of a neighborhood. Noah, did you have a question?
Yeah, and it was related to what Bill talked about, but I know we have other presentations still to come on this. But once they're all complete, are we going to have an independent group, professionals that are going to give some suggestions with all this information together, so that when we are looking at making decisions about things, it's not, each one of us trying to interpret this information, but people even outside the school district looking at it and saying, based on everything that we've gathered information wise, these are the things that we would suggest based on condition of building, location, and projected enrollment.
Yes. Like I said, as part of this whole facilities master plan and all of the information we've been gathering, as you know, we have an administrative planning team, and the administrative planning team, in conjunction with MD Roffers, Bray Architects, and CG Schmidt, will be taking all of this information, we'll be compiling it, analyzing it, and then we'll make recommendations. This is what we feel we should do, or these are the recommendations. This is what we're thinking, and this is why. And then that's something that will be presented to the board and/or other committees for their feedback on.
Great.
We've also been dealing with leadership and learning, because some of that, what goes into this is, do we want to, what will the grade alignments look like? Do we want to stay K-5? Do we want to stay 6-8 and then 9 through 12? Do we want to look at some combination of that? So all of those factors will weigh into this, of what we want the district to look like going forward, and then we'll make recommendations based on all of that information.
All right, thank you.
So Steve, what happens next for us? So this was obviously very illuminating. So, what do we do next? What information should we be expecting to see? What's kind of our timeline for the next phase of discovery?
Well, did you want to comment, Beth?
Just that we're in preparation for a press release related to this information that will then play into our formation of the FACT team, which consists of some city representatives and community representatives, but one staff member, one family from each school. So there'll be 18 different staff members and family representatives, and a high school student from each high school. And that is our goal, to have that group ready to go in January.
I just wanted to recognize too that CG Schmidt and Bray both joined us on the call tonight, really emphasizing that this is a true team effort. Everybody's learning all the pieces. So I think it's really awesome that they were able to join tonight.
Dr. Lexman, did you have anything else to add?
Only that, so kind of well, I think it's important for the board to just understand that as we work on one piece, the next piece is being worked on behind the scenes, right behind it, right? So that Noah, just kind of the questions you asked, Noah, actually lean into what's immediately behind the scenes, which is a whole bunch of different scenarios that CG Schmidt and Brea put together of, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. And so that'll be a workshop with the board coming up. And then the board will help kind of shape that a little bit of, what's realistic, what seems appropriate for our community. And then the big work is really within the facility advisory community team, the FACT team that Beth just alluded to, is to then take feedback from the process and the board and start figuring out what's the direction we're going to really head in here. And we want that to grow up through the community process, because that also turns into the advocacy for what hopefully is a well-supported referendum question or questions. And so those are how the pieces start to fit together now over the next coming months.
Additional questions or comments while we have the team assembled? Noah?
I just wanted to thank everyone for their efforts on this. It's very complicated stuff, something I'm glad I don't have to try and comprehend alone on myself. So thank you very much. I think it was well presented. I'm looking forward to reviewing the full report and seeing how it fits in with the other reports that we'll be getting from the other people that we've engaged in this effort. So thank you very much for your time and efforts on this.
Anybody else? Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say thanks as well. And I just want everyone to, if you put this in perspective of not looking at taking things away, but providing our students the best possible learning opportunities, I think kind of clear the path that we need to take.
If there aren't any additional comments or questions, we would look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your time. Board, we'll see you guys on Monday.